Would you sleep in a barn just to survive another night? That was the question Temperance Ashford asked herself
It's getting worse.
as she stood at the edge of a
The pain.
stranger's ranch.
I can't bear it.
The Wyoming wind cutting through her threadbare coat
I
like
can't
a
let them find
thousand
me.
frozen knives.
This way, quickly.
October had turned cruel in the high country.
Please, I
and
don't
she
know what
had come
happened.
Too far
Who
to
did
turn
this?
back
Tell me.
now.
I can't.
The
Just
ranch
trust me.
house
We have to go, now.
Stood solid
Please,
and
I didn't
silent
mean for this.
at the base
Lies!
of the
Get
valley
off my
smoke,
land now!
curling
I'm
from
going,
its
please
stone
don't!
chimney
Move!
in a thin gray ribbon. Horses shifted in the corral, their breath steaming in the afternoon cold. Behind the house, a barn rose dark against the mountains, its weathered boards promising any shelter from the merciless autumn that threatened to swallow her whole. For nearly an hour she had stood there, hidden among the pines at the property's edge, gathering what remained of her courage. Her hair hung loose and tangled beneath a bonnet that had seen better days. Her dress, once a respectable gray wool, was torn at the hem and stained with 2 months of desperate travel. Her hands, once smooth from sewing fine dresses in Denver, were red and cracked from cold and work she'd begged for and rarely received. She knew she looked like a beggar. She was a beggar. But this was her last chance. The sound of an axe striking wood drew her eyes. A tall man stood beside a neat pile of firewood splitting logs with calm, steady strokes. Even from a distance he looked like the mountains around him, broad, silent, unyielding. His dark hair, touched with silver at the temples, brushed the collar of his worn flannel shirt. His movements were efficient, practiced each swing of the axe, finding its mark, with the precision of a man who had done this 10,000 times before. He worked without hurry, stacking each split log with care. There was something about his steady rhythm that gave Temperance courage. Here was a man who knew the value of work, who understood that survival meant attention to small things done well. She stepped onto the gravel path. The man turned and she felt the weight of his gaze. His eyes were the color of winter sky, pale blue, sharp, unreadable. A scar ran along his jawline, white against sun-darkened skin. He was older than she'd first thought, perhaps 42 or 43, with the kind of weathered face that came from years lived under open sky. He didn't speak. He simply waited, the axe resting against one shoulder, his expression neither welcoming nor hostile, just waiting. Temperance lifted her chin. Her voice came out softer than she intended, but steady. "Good afternoon, sir. My name is Temperance Ashford. I'm looking for work, any kind of work." The man's eyes moved from her face to the small cloth bundle she carried, everything she owned in the world, then to the thin gold wedding band still on her left hand. "Go on," he said. His voice was deep, rough from disuse. "I can cook, clean, mend clothes, tend animals." The words came faster now, desperation bleeding through her careful composure. "I'm not afraid of hard labor, and I learn quickly. I grew up on a farm in Missouri. I know how to work. I just need—" She stopped herself, swallowed hard. "I need a chance, sir. What happened to your husband?" The question hung in the cold air between them. Temperance felt her throat tighten, but she forced herself to meet his eyes. "Owen died in August. Railroad accident in Denver." The words came out flat, practiced. She'd said them so many times they'd lost their power to hurt. "There were debts. I lost our room. I've been looking for honest work since then." She didn't tell him about the landlord who'd suggested she could stay if she was friendly. Didn't mention the 3 weeks she'd spent walking between ranches in the high country, sleeping in abandoned line shacks, and under trees, her boots falling apart, her body growing thinner each day. Didn't say that she had exactly $1.20 left, enough for maybe 3 more days of stale bread if she could find a town that would sell to her. The man studied her for a long moment. She heard a cow lowing in the distance, the creak of the barn door in the wind, the whisper of pine trees swaying. Her breath caught. She was certain he would turn her away, just as all the others had. Finally he spoke. "Winter comes early here. Temperature can drop to 10 below, and that's before the real cold sets in. I could use help with cooking and lighter work around the place. Pay won't be much, mostly room and board. You'll have food and shelter." Relief washed over Temperance so quickly she felt dizzy. She gripped her bundle tighter to keep her hands from shaking. "Thank you. I won't disappoint you, sir." "Callan," he said. "Name's Callan Thorne. I don't stand much on formality out here." "Mr. Thorne?" "Callan." She nodded. "Callan." He set down his axe with deliberate care, then gestured toward the house. "I live alone here. Have since my brother passed last February. I don't want company or complaints. You'll work hard, do what needs doing without being told twice. If you can handle that, you can stay. 2 weeks trial. After that, we'll see." "I understand," Temperance said quickly. "Thank you, truly." Callan studied her one more moment, then nodded once sharp and final. "Come on, then. I'll show you where you'll be staying." She followed him toward the house, her heart pounding with equal parts relief and fear. She had found shelter at last. But she also sensed in some deep place she couldn't name that life with this mountain man would test her in ways she had never imagined. The house was larger than it had appeared from a distance. Built of thick logs chinked with clay, it sat low against the mountainside as if it had grown there. The door was solid oak hung on iron hinges that barely creaked when Callan pushed it open. Inside, warmth hit her like a physical thing. A fire burned in a massive stone fireplace that dominated the main room. The space was simple, but well kept, every piece of furniture sturdy and built for use rather than beauty. A rough-hewn table and 2 chairs sat near the kitchen area. A worn leather chair faced the fireplace, a book resting on its arm. Shelves lined one wall holding supplies and a few more books, their spines cracked from reading. It was a man's space, spare and functional, but not dirty. No dust gathered in the corners. The floor was swept clean. Dishes sat washed and stacked beside a cast-iron sink. Callan moved through the room to a door at the back. "Storage rooms through here. It's small, but it's dry." He pushed open the door and Temperance stepped into a space barely large enough to be called a room. Perhaps 6 feet by 8, with a single narrow window set high in the wall. A cot had been shoved against one wall, covered with a thin blanket. Boxes and crates filled most of the remaining space supplies. She guessed, or things Callan didn't know what else to do with. But it had 4 walls and a ceiling. It was more than she'd had in weeks. "I'll move these boxes out," Callan said, already lifting a crate. "Give you more space." "Please don't trouble yourself," Temperance said quickly. "This is fine. This is more than fine." He looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw something flicker in those winter blue eyes. Not pity exactly, something harder to name, understanding maybe. "You'll want to wash up," he said, setting the crate down. "There's a pump out back and I've got a basin you can use. I'll heat water for you." The kindness in the offer nearly undid her. Temperance felt tears sting her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. "Thank you." Callan nodded and left her alone. She stood in the small room, still clutching her bundle, and for the first time in 2 months, she allowed herself to breathe. Really breathe. She was inside. She was warm. For tonight, at least, she was safe. She untied her bundle with shaking fingers. Everything she owned, one change of clothes, a worn Bible that had been her mother's, a small sewing kit and a daguerreotype of Owen, from before the drinking had changed him. She looked at his face for a long moment, young, smiling, full of promises he'd never keep, then carefully set it at the bottom of her bundle. The past was done. Whatever came next started now. That first night, Temperance proved her worth. She found Callan's kitchen supplies and set to work preparing supper. The pantry was well stocked, but poorly organized flour and cornmeal in thick burlap sacks, salt pork, hanging from hooks, jars of preserved vegetables lined up without any particular order. A man's pantry, functional but haphazard. She made a simple meal, salt pork fried until crispy beans simmered with onions, and molasses cornbread baked in a cast-iron skillet. Nothing fancy but hot, and filling the kind of food a working man needed. Callan came in as the sun was setting, his hands and face scrubbed clean at the pump. He looked at the table set with 2 plates, 2 cups food steaming in serving dishes, and something in his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Smells good," he said. They ate in silence. Temperance was acutely aware of every sound, the scrape of fork on plate, the crackle of the fire, the wind picking up outside. She'd grown so used to eating alone, huddled in alleys or abandoned shacks, that sitting across from another person felt strange, almost intimate. Callan ate steadily, methodically, the way he seemed to do everything. When he'd cleaned his plate, he sat back and looked at her. "You can cook," he said. "My mother taught me, before she passed." He nodded, accepting this. "The work starts early here. I'm usually up before dawn. I don't expect you to rise with me, but breakfast by first light would be appreciated." "Of course." "The pump's out back. There's a root cellar past the barn, vegetables and such. You can take what you need. Don't waste anything." "I won't." Another silence, less awkward this time. "You said your brother passed," Temperance ventured, carefully. "I'm sorry for your loss." Callan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Lachlan died last February. Blizzard came up sudden while he was moving cattle. Found him 3 days later." He paused, staring at something she couldn't see. "He was 28, good man. Better than me." "I'm sure that's not true." "You don't know me well enough to be sure of anything, Mrs. Ashford." The rebuke was gentle but firm. Temperance fell silent, chastened. She'd overstepped. In this house she was hired help, nothing more. She needed to remember that. But when Callan stood to clear his plate, he paused. The cornbread was good. Lachlan always burned his. It wasn't much, but it was something. Temperance allowed herself a small smile. "I'll make it again." That night in her small storage room, Temperance lay on the narrow cot and listened to the house settle around her. The fire in the main room had burned down, and cold was already seeping through the walls. She pulled the thin blanket up to her chin and curled on her side, trying to preserve heat. She was warmer than she'd been in weeks, fed, safe, but sleep came hard anyway. Through the thin wall she could hear Callan moving around in what must be his bedroom, the creak of floorboards, the scrape of a chair, the soft thud of boots being removed. Then silence. Temperance closed her eyes and whispered a prayer her mother had taught her long ago. "Thank you for this day. Thank you for this shelter. Help me be worthy of it." Outside, the wind howled down from the mountains, and the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. The days fell into a rhythm. Temperance rose before first light, her breath fogging in the cold storage room. She would wrap herself in every layer she had and venture into the main room to stoke the fire Callan had banked the night before. By the time the flames caught and warmth began to spread, she'd have coffee brewing strong and black the way he liked it, and eggs frying in the big cast-iron skillet. Callan would appear from his room at exactly the same time each morning, as if he carried a pocket watch in his head. He'd pour himself coffee, drink half the cup standing by the fire, then sit at the table for breakfast. They rarely spoke. He would eat, nod his thanks, and be out the door by full light, heading to whatever work the ranch demanded that day. And there was always work. Temperance learned the rhythm of the ranch through observation and careful questions. Callan ran cattle about 60 head small by some standards, but all he could manage alone. He also kept horses, 4 of them, including a massive bay gelding named Testament that he rode every day. There were chickens in a coop behind the barn, a milk cow named Prudence, who had to be milked twice daily, and a winter garden that still produced hardy greens and root vegetables. Every morning after Callan left, Temperance would clean the house, though it rarely needed much cleaning. She'd discovered quickly that Callan Thorne was not a slovenly man. He put things back where they belonged, wiped up spills, tracked in as little mud as possible. It was the house of a man who'd learned to live alone and had made peace with his own company. But a house needed more than basic cleaning. Temperance set to work, making it not just clean but orderly. She reorganized the pantry grouping like items together, labeling jars in her careful script. She mended curtains that had come loose from their rods. She scoured the cast-iron pots with sand and oil until they gleamed. And she cooked. Every evening she prepared supper using the supplies she found in the root cellar and experimenting with the limited ingredients available. Venison stew with carrots and potatoes, biscuits and gravy, roasted chicken with herbs she'd found growing wild near the creek. She baked bread every third day, the sourdough starter she'd created from flour and water, growing stronger with each feeding. Callan never praised the food directly, but she noticed he always cleaned his plate. Sometimes he'd grunt softly in satisfaction. Once she'd made an apple pie from fruit stored in the cellar, and he'd eaten 2 slices in silence, then simply said, "Good," before retreating to his chair by the fire. It was enough. On the 8th day, Callan spoke to her over breakfast. "You ever shoot a gun?" Temperance looked up startled. "No, sir. My father had a rifle, but he never taught me." Callan nodded, as if this confirmed something he'd suspected. "You're alone here most days. Mountain lions sometimes come down when prey gets scarce. Bears, too, this time of year looking for food before they den up. You need to know how to protect yourself." That afternoon he brought out a Spencer rifle from the house. It was a beautiful weapon, well maintained, the metal clean and oiled. He showed her how to hold it, how to sight down the barrel, how to squeeze the trigger rather than pull it. "Jerking makes you miss," he said, his hands adjusting her grip with surprising gentleness. "Breathe in, let half out, squeeze smooth." They spent an hour in a clearing behind the barn, Callan setting up targets, old cans and bottles lined on a fallen log. At first, Temperance couldn't hit anything. The rifle's kick surprised her, slamming into her shoulder hard enough to leave bruises. The sound was deafening. But Callan was patient. He showed her again and again how to position her feet, how to lean into the stock, how to let the rifle become an extension of her body rather than a foreign object. By the time the light began to fail, she'd managed to hit 3 targets out of 10 shots. "Better," Callan said, taking the rifle from her. "We'll practice again tomorrow." They did. Every afternoon, weather permitting, they spent time at the makeshift range. Temperance's shoulder ached constantly, decorated with bruises in shades of purple and yellow. But her aim improved. 3 out of 10 became 4, then 5, then 6. On day 14, the end of her trial period, she hit 7 targets out of 10 from 50 yards. Callan looked at the shattered bottles, then at her. "You learn quick." "I'm motivated," Temperance said simply. He almost smiled, almost. "Trial period's over. Job's yours if you want to stay." "I want to stay." "Good." He reloaded the rifle, handed it back to her. Again. This time aim for the one on the far left. Temperance raised the rifle, sighted squeezed. The bottle exploded. This time Callan did smile. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines reaching his eyes. "Good," he said. "Real good." And Temperance felt something warm unfurl in her chest that had nothing to do with the late afternoon sun. That night, October showed its teeth. Temperance woke in darkness so cold she couldn't feel her fingers. Her breath came in clouds of white vapor. The thin blanket she'd pulled over herself was inadequate against the temperature that had plummeted while she slept. She lay curled on her side, shivering so hard her teeth chattered, trying to will herself back to sleep. But the cold was relentless. It pressed through the walls of the storage room, seeped up from the floorboards, stole the heat from her body faster than she could generate it. She must have made some sound, a whimper or a gasp, because suddenly she heard movement from Callan's room. Footsteps. Then his voice muffled through the wall. "Mrs. Ashford." "I'm fine," she managed to say, though her voice shook. "Just cold." The footsteps stopped, a long pause, then, "How cold?" "I'll manage." But she wouldn't. She knew she wouldn't. The night was only half over, and she was already losing feeling in her extremities. By morning, she'd be hypothermic. Maybe worse. She heard Callan swear softly, then the sound of his door opening. A moment later, he appeared in the doorway of her room, a lamp in one hand, wearing only his pants and an undershirt. His feet were bare on the cold floor. He looked at her huddled on the cot, looked at the thin blanket, looked at the window where frost had formed on the inside of the glass. His jaw tightened. "This won't do," he said flatly. "I'll be fine. It's just one cold night. It's October 15th. Temperature will drop another 20 degrees before December. This room isn't fit for winter." He set the lamp down, ran a hand through his hair. "Get your things." "Mr. Thorne, it's Callan, and I'm not arguing about this." His voice was firm but not harsh. "That room will kill you. I won't have another person dying in my house because I was too stubborn to do what needed doing." Temperance sat up slowly, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "Where will I go?" Callan looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. Then he said quietly, "My room has a fireplace. It stays warm through the night. There's space for a second bed." The implication hung in the air between them. A man and a woman unmarried sharing a room. In any town, it would be scandal, ruin. But there was no town here, no witnesses, only survival. "I couldn't ask that of you," Temperance said carefully. "You're not asking. I'm telling you." Callan's eyes met hers, steady and clear. "This isn't about what's proper. This is about staying alive. You understand that she did. God help her, she did." "All right," she whispered. Callan nodded once, then left to give her privacy. Temperance gathered her few belongings with shaking hands. When she emerged from the storage room, he was waiting in the main room, the lamp casting long shadows across his face. He led her to his bedroom. It was larger than the storage room, with a proper bed against one wall and a fireplace across from it where coals still glowed red. A window looked out toward the mountains, thick curtains drawn against the cold. A simple dresser, a chair, a rug on the floor, spare but comfortable. Against the far wall, Callan had already set up a second bed, little more than a cot, with a thick mattress. He'd hung a blanket from the ceiling, creating a makeshift curtain between the two sleeping areas. "You'll be on that side," he said, gesturing to the cot. "I'll stay here. Curtain stays up except in emergencies. We'll maintain propriety as much as possible." "Thank you," Temperance said. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Callan moved to the fireplace, added 2 more logs. Flames licked up around them, and warmth began to radiate into the room. "Get some sleep," he said without looking at her. "Morning comes early." He retreated behind the curtain to his own bed. Temperance heard the creak of ropes as he settled in, then silence. She climbed onto the cot, pulled the blankets thicker and heavier than the one in the storage room up to her chin. For the first time in weeks, she felt warm, truly warm, but sleep didn't come easily. She lay awake, acutely aware of Callan's presence on the other side of the curtain. She could hear his breathing steady and deep, could imagine him lying there in the darkness, eyes open, thinking God knew what. Outside, the wind howled down from the mountains. The temperature dropped to 12 degrees. And inside Callan Thorne's bedroom, Temperance Ashford closed her eyes and wondered what line she'd just crossed and whether there would be any way back. The new arrangement became routine with surprising swiftness. Each night, Temperance would retreat to her side of the curtain, change into her nightdress behind its concealing fabric, and climb into bed. Each night she'd hear Callan do the same on his side, the rustle of clothing being removed, the creak of his bed, the sound of him settling in. They never spoke after dark. The curtain became a wall more solid than wood or stone, a boundary they both respected absolutely. But in the mornings, sharing space made them more familiar with each other in small, unavoidable ways. Temperance learned that Callan was an early riser, usually awake before the first hint of dawn. She learned that he was meticulous about his appearance, despite living alone, shaving every other day, with a straight razor he kept honed to perfection. She learned that he read every night before sleep thick books, with cracked spines, everything from Shakespeare to agricultural manuals. And Callan, though he said little, must have been learning about her too. One morning she woke to find a thicker quilt laid across her bed, one he must have retrieved from storage. Another day, she discovered he'd repaired her boots, the sole had been separating, and he'd stitched it back with careful, even stitches. He never mentioned these kindnesses, neither did she. But she began to understand that Callan Thorne was a man who showed care through action rather than words. The work continued. Every afternoon they practiced with the rifle. Temperance's aim steadily improved. 7 hits out of 10 became 8, then 9. Her shoulders stopped bruising as she learned to position the stock correctly. The kick that had once surprised her became familiar, almost comfortable. "You're a natural," Callan said one afternoon in late October, watching her shatter a bottle at 60 yards. "Most people can't shoot worth a damn even after months of practice." "I had a good teacher," he grunted, but she thought she saw pleasure in his eyes. On day 23, Callan brought a second horse from the barn, a smaller mare chestnut with white socks. "This is Patience," he said. "She's gentle. I'll teach you to ride." "Is that necessary? If something happens to me, you'll need to get to town. 40 miles on foot in winter will kill you. On horseback you might make it." The pragmatism was typical Callan, always thinking ahead, always preparing for worst cases. But Temperance heard the underlying message. He was making sure she could survive without him. It should have been reassuring. Instead, it made her chest tight with an emotion she didn't want to examine too closely. Learning to ride proved harder than learning to shoot. Temperance fell 7 times in the first hour alone, landing hard in the dirt of the corral. Each time Callan would appear at her side, offering a hand. Up his expression, neutral. "Again," he'd say simply. By the end of the week, she could mount without help, could sit the mare's gentle trot without bouncing like a sack of flour, could turn and stop with reasonable competence. "Good enough," Callan declared on day 30. "In an emergency you'll manage." Temperance, aching from head to toe, could only nod. That evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Callan spoke into the comfortable silence. "Tell me about Missouri." Temperance looked up from the sock. She was mending his sock. She'd noticed with some amusement that his skill with ranch work didn't extend to needlework. "What do you want to know? You said you grew up on a farm. What kind?" "Small holding, 30 acres. My father raised corn and kept pigs. My mother had a garden and chickens." Temperance's needle moved in steady, practiced motions. "It wasn't much, but it was enough. We were happy there." "Father died when I was 17. Influenza. Mother went 6 months later. Heart, the doctor said, but I think it was grief." She paused, remembering. "I was alone after that. A neighbor helped me sell the farm. That's when I met Owen." Callan waited, not pushing, just present. "He was charming," Temperance said softly. "Handsome. He promised me a good life in Denver, a house stability." I believed him. She tied off the thread, bit it clean. "I was young? I didn't know yet that some people's promises are just words shaped like hope." "He'd drink." She looked up, surprised by his directness. But Callan's face held no judgment, just understanding. "Yes, and gambled. The railroad job was good when he could keep it, but—" She shrugged. "The accident wasn't really an accident. He was drunk. Fell between cars during coupling. By the time they found him, it was too late. I'm sorry. I'm not." The words surprised her, but once said, she realized they were true. "Is that terrible? I'm not sorry he's dead. I'm sorry for who he could have been. I'm sorry I wasted 3 years loving a man who never existed except in my imagination. But I'm not sorry he's gone." Callan studied her across the firelight. "That's honest, at least. I'm tired of lying, to myself most of all." Temperance set aside the mended sock, picked up another. "What about you?" "You said Lachlan was your brother. Any other family?" "No, parents died during the war. Typhoid, in a refugee camp. Lachlan was 12, I was 20. Raised him myself after that." Callan's jaw worked. "Did a poor job of it, I think. He was too good for this world, too trusting." "How did you end up here?" "After the war, I couldn't stay east. Too many ghosts. Came west in '69, worked cattle drives for a few years, saved money. Bought this land in '73. Built the house with Lachlan. It was supposed to be our fresh start." "It still can be," Temperance said quietly. "His memory lives here. That's not nothing." Callan looked at her, something unguarded in his expression. For a moment she thought he might say more, but he just nodded, stood, and moved to the window. "Snow's coming," he said, looking out at the darkness. "I can feel it." Temperance joined him at the window. The sky was heavy with clouds obscuring the stars. The air had that peculiar stillness that came before weather. How soon? Tomorrow, maybe the day after. He glanced at her. When it comes, it'll come hard. First snow of the season always does. Will we be ready? We'll be ready. And standing there beside him, looking out at the gathering storm, Temperance believed him. The snow came on day 35, just as Callan had predicted. Temperance woke to a world transformed white and silent. It fell in thick, heavy flakes that obscured the mountains and muffled all sound. By noon, 6 inches covered the ground. By evening, a foot. Callan worked without stopping, moving cattle closer to the barn, carrying extra feed, checking water troughs to make sure they hadn't frozen. Temperance helped where she could, learning to move through snow that came up to her knees, learning to ignore the bite of cold on her face and hands. They worked until full dark, then stumbled inside, exhausted and half-frozen. Temperance made hot coffee and venison stew, and they ate in silence, too tired for conversation. That night, the temperature dropped. Temperance woke sometime after midnight so cold she couldn't stop shaking. The fire in the bedroom had burned low down to embers. She could see her breath in the dim red glow. She pulled the quilts tighter, curled into a ball, trying to preserve heat. But it wasn't enough. Her teeth chattered so hard she thought they might crack. Her fingers and toes had gone numb. She tried to will herself back to sleep, tried to ignore the cold, but her body was rebelling, going into the first stages of hypothermia. "Mrs. Ashford," Callan's voice soft but urgent. "I'm all right," she managed through chattering teeth. A lie so obvious it wasn't worth speaking. She heard him get out of bed, heard him move to the fireplace and add wood. Flames licked up, but the room had lost too much heat. It would take an hour to warm again, and Temperance didn't have an hour. Callan appeared around the edge of the curtain, lamp in hand. He took one look at her, curled up and shaking lips tinged blue, and his expression hardened. "This won't work," he said. "The fire's too far from your bed. At this temperature you'll freeze before the room warms." "I'll be fine. Just need to wait for the fire. You'll be dead by morning." He set down the lamp, ran both hands through his hair. "There's only one way to stay warm enough tonight." Temperance knew what he was going to say before he said it. She should have been scandalized, should have refused. But she was so cold, and the alternative was freezing to death in a room with a perfectly good fire just too far away to save her. "The bed," she whispered. Callan nodded. "My bed. It's closer to the fireplace, and we'll need to share body heat. It's the only way to keep you alive." "I can't. People would—" "There are no people here," Callan said, his voice gentle but firm. "Just us. Just survival. I give you my word nothing will happen you don't want, but we're running out of time." Temperance looked into his eyes and saw only honesty, only concern. This wasn't desire. This was necessity. "All right," she breathed. Callan helped her to her feet, guided her to his bed. The sheets were still warm from his body, and she nearly wept at the relief of it. He climbed in beside her carefully, leaving space between them, but the cold was too severe. Space meant heat loss. After a few minutes, Callan said quietly, "I'm going to put my arm around you, just to share warmth. That all right?" "Yes." His arm came around her waist, solid and warm. He drew her back against him, and she felt his body heat seep into her frozen limbs like water into parched earth. His chest was broad and solid against her back. His breath stirred her hair. Slowly, painfully, feeling returned to her fingers and toes. The shaking eased. Her breathing steadied. "Better?" Callan asked, his voice low near her ear. "Yes, thank you." They lay like that in the darkness, the fire crackling, snow falling silent outside. Temperance was acutely aware of everywhere their bodies touched, his arm across her waist, his chest against her back, his legs tangled with hers beneath the quilts. It should have been improper. It was improper, but it was also the safest she'd felt since her mother died. "Callan," she whispered. "Yeah. When I first came here, I told you I'd sleep in the barn if that's all there was. I remember. Thank you for not letting me." His arm tightened around her just slightly. Sleep Temperance. Morning comes early. She closed her eyes and for the first time in months slept without fear. Temperance woke to gray dawn light and the warmth of another body beside her. For a confused moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then memory returned, and she realized she was still in Callan's bed, still wrapped in his arms. She should move, should return to her own bed before full daylight. But his warmth was so complete, so encompassing, and outside the window she could see snow still falling. The fire had burned down again. The room was frigid. Callan stirred behind her. His arm moved from her waist, and she felt the loss of his warmth immediately. He sat up, careful not to disturb her more than necessary, and moved to rebuild the fire. Temperance watched him through half-closed eyes. He moved with economy and grace, adding wood-coaxing flames back to life. The growing light revealed his face in profile, strong nose, firm jaw, that thin scar running along the bone. He was handsome, she realized, not in Owen's flashy way, all charm and white teeth, but in a quieter, more permanent way, the handsomeness of a mountain that doesn't need to announce itself because it simply is. He turned and caught her watching. For a moment their eyes held. Something passed between them, unspoken, barely acknowledged. Then Callan looked away. "Storm's not done yet," he said, his voice rough from sleep. "Might snow all day. Will the cattle be all right?" "They'll manage. I moved them close yesterday." He finished with the fire stood. "You should stay in here today. The main room's too far from the heat. No point freezing yourself." "I have work." "Work can wait. Today's about staying warm." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Temperance." "Yes. Last night what happened, it was just survival. You understand that." She should have been relieved by the clarification, should have been grateful he was setting proper boundaries. Instead, she felt something in her chest go tight and disappointed. "Of course," she said. "I understand perfectly." Callan nodded and left. Temperance lay in his bed, wrapped in his quilts, breathing in the faint scent of him that clung to the fabric, wood smoke and pine, and something indefinably male. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white silence. And inside, something had shifted. Some line had been crossed that couldn't be uncrossed, no matter how many times they both pretended otherwise. She pressed her hand to her chest, felt her heart beating steady and strong beneath her palm. She was alive. She was warm. She was safe. But she was also, for the first time since Owen's death, feeling something other than survival, something warmer and more dangerous, something that terrified her more than any storm ever could, because Temperance Ashford was beginning to care for Callan Thorne. And caring, she'd learned the hard way, was the surest path to heartbreak. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer into the winter morning. "Lord, help me be strong. Help me remember this is just employment. Help me protect my heart." But even as she prayed it, she knew it was already too late. Outside, the snow fell harder and the temperature dropped to 15 below zero. And inside, Callan Thorne's house, two people who'd both been broken by loss, began without knowing it the slow work of healing each other. The snow stopped on day 37, leaving behind a world transformed. 3 feet of white blanketed the valley, smoothing rough edges, muffling sound, making familiar landmarks strange and new. The sky cleared to a blue so sharp it hurt to look at, and the temperature stayed locked below zero. Temperance did not return to her own bed. Neither of them spoke about it. Each evening she would retreat behind the curtain to change, and each night she would climb into Callan's bed where he already waited, leaving space between them at first. But the cold was relentless, and space meant heat loss, and survival demanded practicality over propriety. By the third night they slept pressed together without awkwardness, her back to his chest, his arm across her waist, their breathing synchronized in the darkness. It was, Temperance told herself firmly, only practical. But she was beginning to suspect she was lying to herself again. The work continued harder now, with snow to contend with. Every morning, Callan would rise before dawn and spend 2 hours just clearing paths from house to barn, barn to corral, to the line shack where he stored extra feed. Temperance would watch him from the window as she prepared breakfast, see him moving through the pre-dawn darkness with a shovel, his breath fogging white, never hurrying but never stopping either. She learned to move through deep snow, lifting her knees high, following in the paths he'd broken. She learned to carry feed without spilling it, to break ice on water troughs with a steel bar, to recognize the signs of frostbite on her own fingers and catch it before real damage set in. Her hands, already rough from work, became harder still. Her body grew stronger, muscles developing in her arms and back from hauling water and feed. "You're tougher than you look," Callan said one afternoon, watching her carry 2 buckets of water from the pump without stopping to rest. "I'm tougher than I thought I was," Temperance replied. He smiled at that, the real smile that reached his eyes and changed his whole face. "That's usually how it works." On day 41, they stood in the barn together, checking on the horses. Patience, the chestnut mare, had developed a slight limp, and Callan was examining her hoof for stones or injuries. "Tell me about Lachlan," Temperance said quietly. Callan's hand stilled on the horse's leg. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "What do you want to know? What was he like?" Callan set down the hoof, straightened. His eyes went distant, seeing something other than the barn around them. He was good. That's the simplest way to say it. Just fundamentally good in a way I've never been. He saw the best in people, believed in second chances, believed in redemption. His jaw worked. He believed in me when I didn't deserve it. "Why do you say that?" "Because I came back from the war wrong, dark. There were things I saw." He shook his head. "Lachlan never asked about any of it. Just accepted me as I was, worked beside me every day, made me laugh when I forgot how. He saved me in a lot of ways." Temperance moved closer, not touching, but near enough to offer presence. "And then you lost him." February 19th. We'd had a mild winter, got complacent. Storm came up out of nowhere. Cattle scattered. Lachlan went after them. Callan's voice went flat, emotionless, the tone of a man reciting facts to keep feelings at bay. "Found him 2 days later. He'd tried to take shelter under an overhang. Hypothermia got him before the cold could. He just went to sleep. I'm sorry. Everyone says that. Sorry. Like the word fixes anything." But his voice wasn't angry, just tired. "I should have been with him. Should have gone after the cattle myself. Should have—" "You can't live in should-haves," Temperance said softly. "Trust me, I spent a year doing that with Owen. Should have seen the drinking sooner. Should have left. Should have been a better wife. Should-haves will eat you alive." Callan looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw understanding pass between them. They were both carrying ghosts, both still bleeding from losses that hadn't quite healed. "How do you stop?" he asked. "I don't know yet. But I think maybe you start by forgiving yourself, even if you don't think you deserve it." His hand reached out almost involuntarily and touched her face, just his fingers against her cheek, calloused and warm. The gesture was so gentle, so unexpected that Temperance's breath caught. Then Callan seemed to realize what he'd done. He pulled back, turned away. "We should get back. Temperature's dropping." Temperance followed him out of the barn, her cheek still tingling where he'd touched her, her heart beating too fast for comfort. Something was shifting between them, something neither of them seemed ready to name. Day 45 brought the first real test of the fragile peace they'd built. Temperance was in the kitchen, elbow deep in bread dough, when she heard horses outside. Not Callan's horses, she knew their sounds by now. These were unfamiliar, and there were several of them. She moved to the window, wiping flour from her hands. 3 men on horseback had stopped in the yard. They were bundled against the cold, but even from a distance she could see they carried themselves with the easy confidence of men used to being obeyed. Callan emerged from the barn, his rifle held loose in one hand. Not threatening, but not unarmed either. The lead rider, a man with a thick beard and a martial star pinned to his coat, raised one hand in greeting. "Callan Thorne." "That's right." Callan's voice was neutral, giving nothing away. "Name's Josiah Webb. I'm Marshal out of Cheyenne. This is Deputy Carlson and Deputy Hayes. We need to talk." Temperance felt her stomach drop. She moved to the door, opened it despite the cold flooding in. If Callan was in trouble, she needed to know. "Talk about what?" Callan asked. "Conrad Hayes, incident from back in '76. You remember it?" Callan's shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. "I remember." "Well, his brother Emmett's been making noise. Says you murdered Conrad in cold blood over some cattle. Says there were no witnesses, and you've been hiding out here ever since." Webb shifted in his saddle. "I'm not saying I believe him, but I've got to ask questions. That's my job." "What happened to Conrad Hayes was self-defense." Callan said, his voice hard. "He was stealing my cattle. Shot Laughlin's horse out from under him. I fought back. Hayes died. It was him or us." "That may be, but without witnesses—" Webb shrugged. "I need you to come to Cheyenne, answer some questions, let a judge sort it out. And if I refuse, then I have to assume Emmett's telling the truth, and I'll have to bring you in the other way." Webb's hand moved to rest on his own rifle. "I'd rather not do that, Thorne. I've heard good things about you from folks in Laramie, but I've got a job to do." Temperance didn't think. She simply moved, stepping out onto the porch despite the freezing air, despite wearing only her house dress and apron. Marshal Webb. All four men turned to look at her. Webb touched his hat. "Ma'am, I'm Temperance Ashford. I work for Mr. Thorne." The lie came easily, better than the complicated truth. "I've been here over a month now. In that time I've seen nothing but honor and decency from this man. He works hard, keeps his word, treats me with respect. Whatever happened with Conrad Hayes, I'd stake my life that Callan Thorne is not a murderer." Webb studied her, his eyes sharp and assessing. "You his wife?" "No, sir." "Then how do you know what he might have done 2 years ago?" "I don't," Temperance said steadily. "But I know what kind of man he is now, and that kind of man doesn't kill in cold blood." "Ma'am, I appreciate your loyalty, but—" "She's my partner," Callan said suddenly. All eyes swung back to him. He looked at Temperance, and something in his expression made her chest tight. "Not hired help, partner. Anything about me is her concern." Webb's eyebrows rose. "That's so?" "That's so." The marshal looked between them, then sighed. "Look, Thorne, I don't want trouble, but I need you to come in. Answer questions. If you've got nothing to hide, a judge will clear you. But you can't just stay out here and pretend the law doesn't exist." Callan was quiet for a long moment. Then, "How long do I have?" "I can give you a week. Get your affairs in order, make arrangements for your stock. Then you'll need to come to Cheyenne with me. Voluntarily would be better for everyone." "And if the judge doesn't believe me—" Webb's silence was answer enough. Callan nodded slowly. 1 week. "Fair enough." Webb gathered his reins. "I'll be back in 7 days. Be ready." He touched his hat to Temperance. "Ma'am?" The 3 men rode off, leaving tracks in the snow. Temperance and Callan stood in the cold, watching them disappear around the bend. Finally Callan spoke. "You shouldn't have done that." "Done what?" "Spoken up for me. Tied yourself to me in Webb's eyes. Now if this goes bad, some of it will stick to you." Temperance turned to face him. "I don't care." "You should care. You've got a whole life ahead of you. You don't need my troubles dragging you down." "You gave me shelter when I had nothing," Temperance said fiercely. "You taught me to shoot, to ride, to survive. You've treated me with more kindness and respect than my own husband ever did. So yes, I spoke up for you, and I'd do it again." Callan stared at her, something raw and unguarded in his eyes. "Why, because you're a good man, and good men are rarer than you think." She wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. "What are you going to do?" "What I have to. Go to Cheyenne. Face this." He looked toward the mountains, his jaw set. "But first we need to prepare. If this goes wrong, you'll need to manage here on your own for a while. Or—" he hesitated. "Or you could leave." Go to town. Find safer work. No. Temperance? No, she said again. I'm not leaving. Whatever happens, we face it together. You don't owe me that. Maybe not, but I'm choosing it anyway. Callan looked at her for a long moment. Then so quietly she almost missed it, he said, "Thank you." They went inside together. The bread dough had risen while they talked, and Temperance punched it down with more force than necessary, working out the fear and anger that threatened to overwhelm her. Callan had been running. Not from cowardice, she was certain, but from a justice system that didn't always care about truth. And now his past had found him anyway, and she'd just tied herself to him in front of a federal marshal. She should be terrified, should be planning her exit, should be protecting herself the way she'd learned to do after Owen. Instead, she was planning how to help him prove his innocence. The next days passed in a blur of preparation. Callan took Temperance through everything she'd need to know if he didn't come back where the deed to the property was kept, how much money he had saved, which neighbors could be trusted for help. He wrote instructions in his careful, blocky handwriting how to manage the cattle through winter, when to expect spring calving, who to sell to in Laramie if she needed cash. "You won't need this," Temperance said, watching him write. "You'll be back. Maybe, but maybe not." He didn't look up from his work. "You need to be prepared." On day 48, Callan rode to the neighboring ranch 15 miles through snow to talk to Garrett Whitlock, the 60-year-old rancher who'd known both Callan and Lachlan for years. He returned after dark, his face grim. "Garrett saw what happened with Hayes," he said over supper. "He'll testify. Says Hayes had been stealing from several ranches, and everyone knew it. Says when I fought back, I was within my rights. That's good, isn't it? Maybe, if the judge listens. If Emmett Hayes doesn't have more influence than truth." Callan pushed food around his plate. "I've learned that right doesn't always win." "It will this time," Temperance said with more confidence than she felt. "It has to." That night they lay in bed as they had for weeks now, her back to his chest, his arm around her waist. But there was a new tension between them, an awareness of how tenuous their peace might be. "Callan," Temperance whispered into the darkness. "Yeah, if they—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "If they put you in prison, if they hang you, if you don't come back." "If it goes bad," Callan said quietly, "you'll survive. You're stronger than you think, stronger than I was when I was your age. I don't want to survive alone anymore." His arm tightened around her. "I know, but you might have to. Promise me you'll fight. Promise me you won't just accept whatever they decide." "I promise." They fell silent. Outside an owl called in the darkness. The fire burned low, and Temperance lay awake memorizing the feel of him, the steady rise and fall of his breathing, the solid warmth of his body, the sense of safety she'd found in his arms. If she lost this, lost him, she didn't know how she'd bear it. But she'd survived Owen's death, survived losing her home, her security, her sense of self. She'd walked through mountains in worn-out boots with nothing but stubbornness keeping her alive. She would survive this too. But God, she didn't want to have to. Day 50 brought unexpected help. Temperance was hanging laundry on the line Callan had strung in the barn. It was too cold to dry anything outside when she heard a wagon approaching. She moved to the barn door, one hand instinctively going to the rifle Callan had insisted she keep close. But the wagon held no threat. An older woman sat on the bench seat wrapped in furs against the cold, driving a sturdy pair of draft horses. Behind her, a younger woman, perhaps 25, sat among bundles and crates. The wagon stopped, and the older woman climbed down with surprising agility. She was perhaps 55, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, and eyes as sharp as January frost. "You must be Mrs. Ashford," the woman said. "I'm Abigail Monroe. I own the ranch about 20 miles south. This is my daughter Ruth." "Miss Monroe?" Temperance said, unsure what else to say. "I'm afraid Mr. Thorne is out checking fence line, I'd imagine. We passed him about a mile back. He said to come on up to the house." Abigail's eyes swept over Temperance, assessing without judging. "I heard about the marshal's visit. Figured you might need some company and supplies." "That's very kind, but kindness has nothing to do with it. Callan Thorne helped me when my husband died 3 years ago. Worked my ranch for 2 weeks without pay, made sure I didn't lose everything. I owe him." Abigail gestured to the wagon. "Besides, we brought food fabric for warm clothes, and Ruth here is the best seamstress in the territory. Figured if you're managing alone while Callan's in Cheyenne, you'll need proper winter gear." Temperance felt tears sting her eyes. She blinked them back. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just help us unload." The 3 women worked together carrying supplies into the house. Abigail had brought an astonishing amount: salt pork flour, coffee, sugar, dried beans, preserved vegetables, fabric in thick wool for trousers and coats, extra blankets, even a book poetry by someone named Whitman. "For the long nights," Abigail said, setting it on the table. "When you're alone, you'll need something to occupy your mind." They sat together over coffee, and Temperance found herself telling these near strangers about Owen, about Denver, about her desperate search for work. Ruth listened with wide, sympathetic eyes. Abigail just nodded as if she'd heard similar stories before. "Men die," Abigail said bluntly. "Or they leave, or they turn mean. Women survive. That's what we do." She sipped her coffee. "But it's easier when we help each other." "I barely know you," Temperance said. "Why would you help me?" "Because I was you once. 20 years ago I showed up at my husband's homestead with nothing but the clothes I wore. He was a hard man, but fair. Taught me to be strong. When he died, the community helped me because he'd helped them." Abigail set down her cup. "Callan's part of that community, and now so are you." Later, after the Monroe women had left, Temperance stood in the house, surrounded by their gifts, and felt something shift inside her. She'd been alone for so long, even when Owen was alive, she'd been fundamentally alone. But here in this isolated valley, she'd found something she hadn't expected. She'd found people who cared. When Callan returned at dusk, he looked at the supplies, then at her. "Abigail came by. Yes, she said you helped her once. Her husband was a friend. It was nothing." "It wasn't nothing to her." Temperance moved to stand in front of him. "Why didn't you tell me you were part of a community here? You made it sound like you were completely alone." "I prefer to be alone." "That's not the same as being alone." She touched his arm. "These people care about you, Callan. They'll help prove your innocence." "Maybe." But he didn't sound convinced. That night, wrapped in new blankets that still smelled of lavender, Temperance made a decision. If Callan wouldn't fight for himself, she'd fight for him. She'd find witnesses, gather evidence, do whatever it took to prove he'd acted in self-defense. She'd lost too much already. She wasn't losing this, wasn't losing him, not without a fight. Day 55 arrived too quickly. Temperance woke before dawn, knowing this was the day Callan would have to leave for Cheyenne. The journey would take 4 days, there perhaps a week for the hearing, 4 days back. 2 weeks at minimum, maybe longer, maybe forever if things went wrong. She rose and dressed in the darkness, then went to prepare breakfast. Her hands shook as she worked cracking eggs into the skillet slicing bread. This might be the last meal she ever cooked for him. Callan emerged from the bedroom dressed for travel, heavy coat, warm hat, gloves. He'd packed light, just a bedroll and saddlebags. His rifle was cleaned and oiled, ready for the journey. They ate in silence, neither able to find words adequate for the moment. Finally, Callan spoke. "The cattle are set. There's enough feed for a month. Garrett Whitlock will check on you every few days. If you need anything, I'll manage." "I know you will." He paused. "But if things go badly, if I don't come back, the ranch is yours. I've left papers with the attorney in Laramie. Everything's in order." "Stop talking like you're not coming back." "Temperance." "No." She stood, anger and fear making her voice sharp. "You're coming back. You're innocent. Truth matters. Justice matters." Justice is a nice idea, but the law cares more about who has power than who has truth. Then we'll make them listen. She moved around the table to face him. "You're not alone in this, Callan. You have witnesses. You have friends. You have me." He looked at her, and something in his expression cracked. "Why does that terrify me more than the trial?" "What do you mean?" "I mean I've been alone for so long, I forgot what it felt like to have someone care. And now you're standing here fighting for me, and I don't—" He stopped, struggling for words. "I don't know what to do with that." Temperance reached out, took his hand. His fingers were calloused and warm-strong from years of hard work. "You don't have to do anything, just let me stand with you." Callan's other hand came up, cupping her face the way he had that day in the barn. But this time he didn't pull away. This time he stepped closer until barely any space remained between them. "If I don't come back," he started. "You will. But if I don't, I need you to know—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "These weeks with you have been the best I've had since Lachlan died. You brought life back into this house, into me. I don't know how to say that without sounding like a fool, but it's true." Temperance felt tears burn her eyes. "You're not a fool, and you will come back, because I'm not done with you yet." Something that might have been a laugh escaped him. Then, slowly giving her time to pull away, he lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle, tentative, nothing like Owen's demanding kisses. Callan kissed her like she was something precious, something that might break if he wasn't careful. His lips were soft against hers, asking rather than taking. Temperance rose on her toes, kissed him back, pouring into it all the words she couldn't say. "Come back to me. Be safe. I need you." When they finally broke apart, Callan rested his forehead against hers. "I'll come back," he whispered. "I promise." "You better. I'm not running this ranch alone." He smiled, really smiled, and she memorized the way it transformed his face. Then he stepped back, picked up his bags, and moved toward the door. Temperance followed him outside. Marshal Webb was already there, sitting on his horse with patient inevitability. Garrett Whitlock had come as well, along with two other men Temperance recognized from Abigail's descriptions: Jonas Cade, the blacksmith, and a weathered rancher named Samuel Pritchard. "We're riding with you," Garrett said to Callan. "We'll testify. Tell them what really happened." Callan looked at the men, something working in his jaw. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, we do," Jonas said simply. "You're one of ours." Webb shifted in his saddle. "That's fine. The more witnesses, the faster this'll get sorted. But we need to ride. Long way to Cheyenne." Callan mounted Testament, settling into the saddle with easy grace. He looked down at Temperance, and she saw everything he couldn't say written in his eyes. 2 weeks, he said. "I'll be back in 2 weeks. I'll be waiting." The men rode out, Callan looking back once before the bend in the trail hid him from view. Temperance stood in the cold until she couldn't see them anymore, her fingers pressed to her lips where he'd kissed her. Then she turned and went inside. There was work to do, cattle to feed, a ranch to maintain, a future to prepare for. And when Callan Thorne came home because he would come home, she needed to be ready for whatever came next. The first days alone were the hardest. Temperance threw herself into work, keeping busy to avoid thinking. She fed the cattle twice daily, broke ice on the water troughs, cleaned the barn, organized the supply room. She baked bread, cooked meals she mostly couldn't eat, and sat by the fire, reading Whitman's poetry without absorbing a single word. At night she slept in Callan's bed because her own cot felt too empty, too cold. She wrapped herself in his quilts and breathed in the fading scent of him, wood smoke and leather and pine, and tried not to think about prison cells or gallows. On day 58, Garrett Whitlock rode up as promised. He checked the stock with her, pronounced her work satisfactory, and left her a haunch of venison from a deer he'd shot. "Any word?" Temperance asked, knowing it was too soon but unable to stop herself. "Takes 4 days just to get there, ma'am. Won't hear anything for at least a week." He tipped his hat. "But Callan's smart, and he's got good men speaking for him. Try not to worry." Easy to say, impossible to do. On day 61, Abigail Monroe returned with Ruth. They brought more supplies and, unexpectedly, 2 other women. Sarah Brennan, who ran a boarding house in Laramie, and Catherine Wells, a doctor's wife from Cheyenne, who happened to be visiting family. "We heard about the trial," Sarah said, setting down a basket of food. "Figured you could use company." They sat together in Callan's house, 5 women of different ages and backgrounds, and talked. Not about the trial, not about men or loss or fear, just about ordinary things, recipes and weather, and a new hat shop opening in Laramie. Normal conversation, mundane and comforting. When they left, Temperance felt less alone. On day 65, she woke to find fresh snow had fallen in the night, 2 more inches on top of what remained, making the world clean and white. She went through her morning routine, feed cattle, break ice-check fences, and returned to the house to find a rider approaching. Her heart leaped. Callan. He was back early. But as the rider came closer, she realized it wasn't Callan. It was a young man she didn't recognize wearing a mail carrier's badge. "Mrs. Ashford," he called. "Miss Ashford," she corrected, stepping onto the porch. "Got a telegram for you from Cheyenne." He handed her a folded paper, touched his hat, and rode off before she could ask questions. Temperance's hands shook as she unfolded the telegram. The words were brief, impersonal. Hearing concluded. Stop. Verdict. Self-defense. Stop. Callan Thorne cleared all charges. Stop returning 5 days. Stop. Garrett Whitlock. She read it 3 times, not quite believing. Then she pressed the paper to her chest and laughed, a sound somewhere between joy and tears and sheer relief. He was coming home. He was innocent. He was coming home to her. Temperance went inside and, for the first time in a week, allowed herself to hope. Day 70 arrived cold and clear. Temperance had spent the previous day in a frenzy of preparation, cleaning the house, baking bread, making a venison stew that could feed an army. She'd even attempted a pie, though the crust came out uneven and probably wouldn't win any prizes. She told herself this was just being a good housekeeper, being prepared, being practical. She knew she was lying. The truth was, she wanted everything to be perfect for his return. Wanted him to walk into a warm house that smelled of food and welcome. Wanted him to know that she'd kept his ranch running, kept his cattle alive, kept faith. Wanted him to know she'd been waiting. Mid-afternoon, she heard horses. She ran to the window, unladylike, undignified, she didn't care, and saw them riding up the valley. 5 men, Callan Garrett, Jonas, Samuel, and Marshall Webb. They were back. He was back. Temperance grabbed her shawl and ran outside, not caring about the cold or the snow or what she must look like. Callan dismounted before Testament had fully stopped, and then she was running, and he was there, solid and real and home. He caught her as she reached him, arms closing around her, lifting her off her feet. She buried her face in his shoulder and felt him shake, whether with laughter or emotion, she couldn't tell. "You came back," she whispered against his neck. "I promised, didn't I?" She pulled back enough to see his face. He looked tired, shadowed with exhaustion, but there was something lighter in his eyes, something that hadn't been there before. "Tell me," she demanded. "Inside," Garrett said, dismounting. "It's cold as hell out here, and we've been riding for 4 days straight." They crowded into the house, too many men for the small space, but nobody seemed to mind. Temperance served coffee and stew while they talked, the story emerging in fragments and overlapping voices. The trial had lasted 3 days. Emmett Hayes had testified, first painting Callan as a murderer and cattle thief. But then Garrett had taken the stand, backed by Jonas and Samuel. They'd all witnessed Conrad Hayes stealing cattle from multiple ranches. They'd all seen him shoot Laughlin's horse. They'd all confirmed Callan had acted in self-defense. But the real turning point, Garrett said, was when we presented Laughlin's journal. Callan had brought his brother's journal, detailed entries about Hayes's thefts, dates and times and descriptions. Written in Laughlin's careful hand, it provided irrefutable evidence. And then, Jonas added with grim satisfaction, Emmett Hayes broke on the stand, admitted his brother had a drinking problem, admitted Conrad had been in trouble before. The judge threw out the charges right there. Just like that? Temperance asked. Just like that, Callan confirmed. Marshal Webb even apologized for the inconvenience. Webb, finishing his coffee, grunted. I was doing my job, but I'm glad it worked out. Thorne's a good man. He stood. We should head out. Let you two have some peace. The men filed out, offering handshakes and quiet congratulations. Garrett was last. He paused in the doorway, looked at Temperance, then at Callan. You've got something good here, he said quietly. Don't waste it being stubborn. Then he was gone, and Temperance and Callan were alone. They stood in the middle of the room, suddenly awkward with each other. 2 weeks apart had created a strange distance that their earlier embrace hadn't quite bridged. House looks good, Callan said finally. I tried to keep things running. You did more than that. Garrett said the cattle are in better shape than when I left. I had good teachers. Silence fell again. Callan moved to the fire, stared into the flames. Temperance watched him, this man who'd become so essential to her life in such a short time. I thought about you, Callan said, not looking at her. Every day. Wondered if you were managing, if you were safe, if you'd... He stopped. If you'd still be here when I got back. Thought maybe you'd realize you could manage without me, that you'd leave. Temperance moved to stand beside him. I'm not leaving. You should think about that. Really think. He turned to face her. I'm cleared of murder, but I'm still a hard man to live with. Still closed off. Still carrying ghosts. We're all carrying ghosts, Callan. Yeah, but most people have the sense not to tie themselves to someone else's. Is that what we're doing? She asked quietly. Tying ourselves to each other. Callan looked at her for a long moment. Then, with careful deliberation, he reached out and took her hand. That kiss before I left. I've thought about it every day since. Thought about what it meant. What I wanted it to mean. And what did you decide? I decided I'm tired of being alone. Tired of pretending I don't need anyone. Tired of running from feeling anything because I'm scared of losing it. His hand tightened on hers. I decided that if you'll really have me not as an employer, but as a partner, I'd like to try building something real. Temperance felt her eyes burn. I'd like that too. Even knowing I'm difficult. That I go days without talking. That I wake up with nightmares sometimes. Even knowing all that. Because I go days being stubborn. I burn dinner sometimes. I have nightmares too. She stepped closer. We're both broken, Callan, but maybe broken things can fit together in new ways. He pulled her close, wrapped his arms around her, and just held her. No kiss, no grand gesture, just the solid comfort of being held by someone who understood. Welcome home, Temperance whispered against his chest. Yeah, Callan said softly. I am. And standing there in the firelight, two people who'd both lost everything, began to understand that maybe, just maybe, they'd found something worth keeping, something worth fighting for, something worth calling home. The days after Callan's return settled into a new rhythm different from before. Where once they'd maintained careful distance now, they moved around each other with easy familiarity. He would touch her shoulder as he passed. She would brush flour from his sleeve. Small gestures that spoke of intimacy earned rather than assumed. But they still hadn't talked about what came next. On day 73, Temperance was churning butter in the kitchen when Callan came in from checking fence lines. He stood in the doorway, stamping snow from his boots, watching her work with an expression she couldn't quite read. What? She asked, pausing in her rhythm. Marry me. The churn paddle slipped from her fingers, splashing buttermilk onto the table. She stared at him, certain she'd misheard. What did you say? Callan stepped into the room, pulled off his gloves with deliberate care. I said, marry me. Not because you need shelter, you've proven you can manage just fine. Not because I need a housekeeper, I got by before. Marry me because I choose you. Every day. Deliberately. Temperance gripped the edge of the table, her heart hammering. Callan, I know it's not romantic. I don't have fancy words or pretty speeches. He moved closer, his winter blue eyes steady on hers. But I can promise you this, I'll work beside you every day. I'll teach you everything I know. I'll protect you with everything I have. And I'll never take you for granted the way your first husband did." "That's not a high bar to clear," Temperance said, but her voice shook. "No, but it's where we start." He reached out, took her hand. "I'm not asking you to love me, not yet. I'm asking you to build something with me, a real partnership, a real life, and maybe somewhere along the way, love comes too." Temperance looked at their joined hands, his rough and scarred from labor, hers red and chapped from work and cold. Not the hands of delicate people living delicate lives, the hands of survivors. "Yes," she whispered. Callan's breath left him in a rush. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you." She looked up, met his eyes. "Not because I need you, but because I choose you too. Every stubborn, difficult, wonderful piece of you." He pulled her into his arms, held her so tight she could barely breathe. Against her hair he murmured, "Thank you." "For what?" "For staying. For fighting for me, for seeing something worth keeping." Temperance pulled back enough to see his face. "There's a lot worth keeping, Callan Thorne. You just needed someone to show you." This time, when he kissed her, there was nothing tentative about it. It was a claim and a promise fierce and certain. Temperance kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands fisting in his shirt, her body pressed against his. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Callan rested his forehead against hers. "We should do this properly. Talk to Reverend Finch in Laramie. Have witnesses. Soon as the weather clears enough to ride." He smiled that rare transforming smile. "I don't want to wait long. Neither do I." But before the wedding could happen, the past returned one final time. Day 76 brought a visitor Temperance had hoped never to see again. She was hanging laundry in the barn when she heard an unfamiliar horse. Moving to the door, she saw a man dismounting, tall, well-dressed despite the cold, with a face she recognized from Denver. Marcus Whitfield, Owen's former employer, the man Owen had owed money to. Temperance's stomach dropped. She'd thought that debt had died with Owen. Apparently not. Marcus saw her and smiled, the expression sharp and predatory. "Mrs. Ashford, or should I say Mrs. Thorne, I heard congratulations are in order." "What do you want, Marcus?" "Just collecting what's owed. Your late husband borrowed $340 from me. With interest over these months, that's now $380. He pulled a paper from his coat. "I have the promissory note right here, signed by Owen Ashford." Temperance's hands clenched. "I didn't know about that debt. I have nothing to pay you with." "Oh, I think you do. This ranch looks prosperous enough. I'm sure Mr. Thorne wouldn't want his new bride harassed over her late husband's debts." Marcus's smile widened. 30 days. Bring me $380 or I'll file a lien against this property." "You can't do that. The debt was Owen's, not mine." "In the eyes of the law, a wife's debts are her husband's debts, and since Owen's estate had no assets, the debt passes to you." He tucked the paper away. 30 days, Mrs. Ashford. I'll be in Laramie staying at the Grand Hotel." He mounted and rode off, leaving Temperance standing in the snow, shaking with anger and fear. She didn't hear Callan approach until he spoke behind her. "Who was that?" She turned to find him emerging from the tree-line, rifle in hand. He must have been checking the back pasture. His expression was hard, dangerous in a way she'd never seen before. Marcus Whitfield. He was Owen's employer in Denver. Temperance's voice came out flat. "He says Owen owed him $380. Says if I don't pay within 30 days, he'll file a lien against the ranch." Callan's jaw worked. "Show me the promissory note." "I don't have it. He just showed it to me." "Then he might be lying. Or he might not be." Temperance wrapped her arms around herself. "Owen gambled. He could have borrowed from anyone. I wouldn't have known." Callan was quiet for a long moment, staring in the direction Marcus had ridden. Then, "How long have you known about this?" "I didn't know, not until just now." "How long have you suspected?" Temperance closed her eyes. "Since Denver. The landlord mentioned debts. But I didn't know specifics. Didn't know names or amounts." She looked at him. "I should have told you." Should have warned you this might happen. Yeah, you should have, Jeff. His voice was flat controlled, but she could see the anger underneath. What else haven't you told me? Nothing. I swear there's nothing else. How do I know that? How do I know there won't be another creditor showing up next month or the month after? You don't, Temperance said, feeling tears sting her eyes. You just have to trust me. Callan laughed, sharp and bitter. Trust. That's rich. I asked you to marry me 3 days ago, Temperance. 3 days. And now I find out you've been keeping secrets. Not secrets, just things I didn't know how to tell you. Well, you better figure it out, because I can't build a life with someone who's not honest with me. He turned toward the house. I need to think. Callan, not now. I need space. He walked away, and Temperance stood alone in the cold, watching the man she loved put distance between them because she'd been too afraid to trust him with her full truth. The next 2 days were terrible. Callan was civil, but distant, speaking only when necessary. He took his meals standing by the fire, avoided eye contact, retreated to the barn for hours at a time. At night they still shared a room. The temperature was too cold for anything else, but he stayed on his side of the bed, careful not to touch her. Temperance felt the loss of his warmth like a physical wound. On day 78 she couldn't take it anymore. She found him in the barn repairing tack and planted herself in front of him. We need to talk. I'm busy. I don't care. We're talking. She crossed her arms. You're angry. I understand that. But shutting me out won't solve anything. Callan set down the leather he'd been working on. You kept something from me that could cost us everything. How am I supposed to just get over that? I'm not asking you to get over it. I'm asking you to talk to me about it. Fine. Talk. He leaned back against the workbench, his expression closed. Tell me what else you're hiding. Nothing. There's nothing else. How can I believe you? Because I'm telling you the truth. Temperance's voice rose. I made a mistake. I should have told you about the possibility of debts, but I didn't know for certain, and I was afraid if I mentioned it, you'd send me away. I wouldn't have... Wouldn't you? She stepped closer. When I first came here, you didn't want me. You made that clear. I was desperate and broken, and you gave me a chance, but only just barely. If I'd told you I might bring creditors and complications, you'd have put me back on the road. Callan's jaw tightened because they both knew she was right. So yes, Temperance continued, I kept quiet. I hoped Owen's debts had died with him. I hoped I could start fresh without the past following me. I was wrong, but I didn't do it to hurt you. I did it because I was scared. The anger in Callan's expression wavered. Scared of what? Of losing this, of losing you. She felt tears threaten, but blinked them back. I've lost everything before, Callan. My parents, my farm, Owen, my home. Everything. I couldn't bear to lose this too, so I kept quiet and hoped for the best. And that was stupid, but it's what I did. Callan was silent for a long moment. Then quietly, I'm not Owen. You don't have to be afraid of me. I know that. In my head, I know that. But fear isn't rational. He pushed off from the workbench, moved toward her. You should have trusted me. You're right. I should have. But trust doesn't come easy when everyone you've trusted has hurt you. Callan cupped her face in his hands, his expression softening. I know. God knows I know, he sighed. I'm sorry, too. I shut down instead of talking. That's not fair to you. So what do? We figure this out together. He pulled her close, wrapped his arms around her. We'll deal with Whitfield. We'll deal with the debt. But you have to promise me no more secrets, even if you're scared. Even if you think I'll react badly. We talk about it. I promise, Temperance whispered against his chest. Good. He kissed the top of her head. Because I meant what I said about marrying you, and I don't break my promises. That evening they sat at the table and faced the problem squarely. $380, Callan said, writing the number on paper. That's more than I have in savings. Spring cattle sales might bring in $500, but that's months away. Could you sell cattle early? Temperance asked. Not in winter. Prices are terrible, and moving them in snow would kill half the herd. He tapped the pencil against the table. We need another solution. What if we contest the debt, make Whitfield prove it in court? That takes time and money we don't have. And if the note's legitimate, Callan shook his head, better to pay and be done with it. But how? They sat in silence thinking. Then Temperance remembered something. The law firm that wrote to me about Owen's debts. They said his estate had no assets. But what if they were wrong? What if Owen had something I didn't know about? Callan looked up. Like what? I don't know, but it's worth checking. She stood. I need to go to Denver, talk to the law firm, see if there's anything that can offset the debt. That's a week's journey each way, and Denver's not safe for a woman alone. Then come with me. Callan considered. The ranch, Garrett can watch it. He's done it before. Temperance moved to stand beside him. If there's even a chance of settling this without losing everything we have to try. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, we leave in 3 days. That'll give me time to make arrangements with Garrett and prepare for the journey. Day 82 found them on the road to Denver, riding through country Temperance hadn't seen in months. The journey was hard, long hours in the saddle nights, camping in frigid, cold days of pushing through snow and wind. But Callan was with her, and somehow that made everything bearable. On the second night, camped in a sheltered ravine with a fire burning bright, Callan asked the question she'd been dreading. Tell me about Owen, the real story, not what you told me when we first met. Temperance stared into the flames. What do you want to know? Why you married him? What he was really like? How he died? She took a breath, then began. The whole story this time, how Owen had been charming at first, attentive, promising her a life better than her father's farm. How the charm had faded within months of their wedding, replaced by drinking and gambling. How he'd lose money they couldn't afford to lose, then beg her forgiveness with tears and promises. I believed him every time, she said quietly. Thought each time would be the last, that he'd change, that my love would be enough to fix him. She laughed bitterly. It never was. And the accident, he was drunk, again, working the coupling between cars, fell. By the time they got him to a doctor, it was too late. She looked at Callan across the fire. The railroad said it was an accident, paid his funeral expenses. But I knew the truth. He killed himself through his own weakness, and he left me with nothing but debts and shame. That why you wouldn't tell me about the creditors? Ashamed, partly, but mostly I was afraid you'd see me the way everyone in Denver did, as damaged goods, a burden. She met his eyes. I wanted you to see me as strong, capable, worth keeping. Callan was quiet for a moment. Then he moved around the fire to sit beside her. I see you exactly that way. But you know what else I see? What? Someone who survived hell and came out stronger. Someone who walked through mountains alone because she refused to give up. Someone who stands up for people she cares about even when it's dangerous. He took her hand. That's not damaged goods, Temperance. That's steel forged in fire. She leaned against him, felt his arm come around her shoulders. Thank you. For what? For seeing me. The real me, not who I pretend to be. Same to you, he said quietly. I'm not easy to see, but you manage. They sat together in the firelight, two people who'd both been broken, both been betrayed, both survived. And somehow, impossibly, they'd found each other. Denver hit Temperance like a physical blow. She'd forgotten how loud cities were, how crowded, how the air tasted of coal smoke and garbage. After months in the mountains where the only sounds were wind and cattle, the noise of wagons and shouting and industry felt overwhelming. Callan stayed close to her, one hand on his rifle, his eyes scanning constantly. You all right? I will be. It's just different than I remembered. They found the law firm Hamilton and Cross in a respectable building near the courthouse. The clerk, a thin man with spectacles, looked up as they entered. May I help you? I'm Temperance Ashford. You wrote to me about my late husband Owen Ashford's estate." Recognition flickered across the clerk's face. "Ah, yes, one moment, please." He disappeared into a back room, returned with an older gentleman in a fine suit. "Mrs. Ashford, I'm Theodore Hamilton. Please come into my office." They sat in leather chairs while Hamilton pulled a file from his cabinet. "Your husband's estate was quite complicated. Multiple debts, few assets. We did our best to settle affairs, but as we wrote to you, there wasn't enough to cover what was owed." "I'm here about Marcus Whitfield," Temperance said. "He claims Owen owed him $380. Hamilton frowned. "Whitfield? Yes, he did file a claim, but—" He flipped through papers. "Here, we sent him notification that the estate couldn't pay. By law, his claim died with Owen since there were no assets." "But Whitfield says he has a promissory note, says the debt transfers to me." "That's not accurate. Under Colorado law, a widow is not responsible for her deceased husband's unsecured debts if the estate has no assets." Hamilton pushed the papers across the desk. "See here. We settled the estate in September. All creditors were notified. Whitfield has no legal claim against you." Temperance felt relief flood through her. "You're certain?" "Absolutely. If he's harassing you, that's illegal. I can write a letter on your behalf making this clear." "Please," Callan said, "and make it strongly worded." Hamilton smiled. "I can do that." An hour later, they left the law office with official documentation and a letter from Hamilton to Whitfield outlining in precise legal language why his claim was invalid and warning him against further harassment. Temperance felt like she could breathe for the first time in weeks. "It's over," she said, standing on the Denver street with the precious papers clutched in her hands. "He can't touch us." Callan pulled her into his arms right there in public, uncaring who saw. "'Tis over," he agreed. But Temperance knew it was more than that. It wasn't just the debt that was over, it was her past. All of it. Owen Marcus, the shame and fear, all of it could finally be laid to rest. She was free. They spent one night in a Denver hotel, a luxury Temperance insisted wasn't necessary, but Callan insisted was, and started back the next morning. The return journey felt lighter somehow, despite the cold and distance. They talked more, laughed more, planned more. "I want to expand the herd," Callan said on the third day. "Another 50 head by fall, which means we'll need to build a second barn. We're partners, aren't we?" "This is your ranch as much as mine now." Temperance smiled. "I like the sound of that." "Good, because I'm going to work you half to death come spring. I can handle it. I know you can." On the night before they reached home, camped in the same ravine as before, Callan made love to her for the first time. It was gentle, careful, nothing like the rough encounters she'd endured with Owen. Callan treated her like she was precious, asking permission with every touch, every kiss, making sure she wanted this. She did. God, she did. Afterward, wrapped in his arms beneath the stars, Temperance felt complete in a way she'd never experienced. This was what partnership felt like, what respect felt like, what love, though neither of them had said the word, yet felt like. "Marry me tomorrow," Callan said into her hair. "Tomorrow. Soon as we get back. I don't want to wait any more." "Neither do I." They rode into the ranch on day 92 to find Garrett Whitlock waiting with news. "Reverend Finch is in Laramie," Garrett said. "Heard you might be wanting his services soon. Said he'd wait 3 days if you wanted to come to town." Callan looked at Temperance. Tomorrow, she agreed. They rode to Laramie the next morning, accompanied by Garrett, and to Temperance's surprise, Abigail Monroe and her daughter Ruth. "You need witnesses," Abigail said simply, "and a woman to stand with you." The ceremony was held in Laramie's small church with Reverend Amos Finch presiding. It was simple, nothing like the elaborate wedding Temperance had had with Owen. Just her in a dress Ruth had helped her press Callan in his cleanest shirt and a handful of friends who'd become family. "Do you, Callan Thorne, take Temperance Ashford to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." Callan's voice was steady, his eyes never leaving hers. And do you, Temperance Ashford, take Callan Thorne to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do. Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Callan kissed her, and the small congregation applauded. Marshal Webb, who'd shown up uninvited but welcome, let out a whoop. Even Jonas Cade smiled. Afterward, they had a simple meal at Abigail's boarding house, venison and potatoes and apple pie. Someone produced a fiddle, and there was dancing. Temperance, who couldn't remember the last time she'd danced, let Callan spin her around the room until she was dizzy with laughter. "Happy?" he asked, pulling her close. "Happier than I have any right to be." "You have every right," he said fiercely. "You survived. You earned this." They rode home that evening, newly married, the mountains rising dark against the sunset. The ranch looked different somehow, not just a place of survival now, but a home, their home. That night in their bed, not his bed or her bed, but theirs, Callan pulled her close and said the words he'd been holding back. "I love you, Temperance Thorne." She turned in his arms, kissed him softly. "I love you too." It was that simple, and that complicated, and that perfect. Spring had come to the mountains, turning the world green and alive. The snow had melted, revealing valleys full of wildflowers. Calves dotted the pastures, new life everywhere. Temperance stood on the porch of the expanded house. Callan had added 2 rooms and a proper pantry over the winter, one hand resting on her swollen belly. 7 months pregnant, and she felt enormous. Beautiful, Callan insisted, but enormous. She watched him work in the corral, training a new horse with the same patience. He showed everything. He'd aged this past year, she thought. Or maybe not aged, but softened. The hard edges worn smooth by happiness. Movement on the road caught her eye. A wagon approaching. As it drew closer, she recognized the driver, a young woman, maybe 22, with a worn carpetbag beside her on the seat. She had that look Temperance remembered from her own arrival, desperate, determined, holding on by sheer will. The wagon stopped and the young woman climbed down. "Excuse me, ma'am. I'm looking for work, any kind of work. I can cook, clean, sew." Temperance smiled, remembering. "What's your name?" "Clara Brennan." "Well, Clara, I think we might be able to help each other. My husband and I could use an extra set of hands, especially with the baby coming. And we've got a room that needs filling." She gestured toward the house. "It's warm, has a good bed, and the pay is fair." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. You don't know what this means." "Oh, I think I do." Temperance put an arm around the younger woman's shoulders. "Come on. Let me introduce you to my husband. And welcome home." Callan looked up as they approached, saw the young woman with that familiar, desperate hope in her eyes, and met Temperance's gaze over her head. He smiled, understanding. They'd been saved once. Now they could save someone else. That night, after Clara had been settled in the spare room and fed and shown around the ranch, Temperance and Callan sat on the porch watching the sunset. "You think she'll make it?" Callan asked, his hand resting on Temperance's belly, feeling their child kick. "Yes, because we'll help her, the way we were helped." "The way you helped me, you mean?" Temperance laughed. "Pretty sure it went both ways." "Maybe." He pulled her closer, careful of her belly. "You ever think about that first day when you showed up ready to sleep in my barn? Every day. I think about how terrified I was, how certain I was that I'd die out here. And now I know this is where I was always meant to be." She turned to kiss him, soft and certain. "With you. Building this, building us." Callan rested his hand on her belly again, feeling the strong kicks of their son. They both knew somehow it was a boy. What should we name him? Temperance had been thinking about this for months. Lachlan Owen, after both our ghosts, the ones who brought us here. Callan's eyes filled, but he blinked the tears back. Lachlan Owen Thorne. He'll have a good life, better than ours. The best we can give him. That's all anyone can do. They sat together as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. The ranch spread out before them, solid and real. The house behind them warm and full. the future ahead uncertain but faced together. Temperance thought about the woman she'd been desperate, broken, willing to sleep in a barn just to survive. Thought about the journey that had brought her here, every hard mile and harder choice. She wouldn't change a single moment, because every moment had led her to this, to Callan, to home, to the child growing inside her, to a life she'd earned with her own 2 hands and stubborn heart. "What are you thinking?" Callan asked, his voice low and warm in the gathering dusk. Temperance smiled, leaned her head against his shoulder. "I'm thinking that sometimes the mountains take everything from you, strip you down to nothing but will and bone. But if you survive, if you keep walking, keep fighting, keep believing there's something better ahead, sometimes the mountains give back more than they took." "What did they give you? You, this, us?" She placed her hand over his on her belly. "Everything I didn't know I needed." Callan kissed the top of her head. "Same, Temperance. Same." Inside the house, a lamp flickered to life in Clara's window. Another lost soul finding shelter. Another story just beginning. And on the porch, Callan and Temperance Thorne sat together, watching night fall over the valley. They'd claimed the home, they'd built the future they'd earned. 2 people who'd survived everything life could throw at them. 2 people who'd found each other in the darkness and built a light together. 2 people who'd learned that sometimes the answer to "would you sleep in a barn just to survive?" is the beginning of a story about so much more than survival. It's a story about dignity, about courage, about refusing to give up when giving up would be easier. It's a story about partnership built not on passion or convenience, but on respect earned through shared hardship. It's a story about second chances, redemption, and the stubborn human capacity to keep hoping even when hope seems foolish. And it's a story that ends not with a grand gesture or dramatic declaration, but with 2 people sitting on a porch at sunset, hand in hand, facing whatever comes next together. Because in the end, that's what matters. Not the beginning with all its desperation and fear, not the middle with all its trials and tests, but the choice to keep building, keep trying, keep loving, even when love is hard. The mountains had tested them both. They'd survived. And now together they would thrive. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The first stars appeared in the darkening sky. And Callan Thorne pulled his wife closer, feeling their child move between them, and thought about the woman who'd shown up at his door months ago, willing to sleep in his barn just for a chance. She'd changed everything, saved him, though he'd thought he was saving her, given him a future when he'd resigned himself to living in the past. "I love you," he said into the gathering night. "I love you too," Temperance replied. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything.